Hello and welcome to a brief analysis of Chapter 13 of Crow Country. This chapter is focused on the actions that take place at the Bort pub, and we can see a lot of the conflict that erupts between different members of the community, with the focus on the relationship between Ellie and David. As we begin this chapter here, we can see that some of the language depicts the setting quite clearly here, and we've got an excellent example of personification in the sentence, "The ground beneath her feet was swallowed in darkness." Um, we get these snippets of really descriptive writing throughout different chapters of this text. The first part of this text or chapter I should say, is relatively slow in its development. So I'm not going to focus on it too much now. I'm going to skip through towards the latter half and have a look at the conflict that develops. As Ellie, David, Sadie are at the pub enjoying their dinner, they are seated next to Craig and Amanda Mortlock and their children, Lockie being one of those. And they also meet Bethany, their daughter. And it's because of this sort of family setting that the heated debate and argument that follows stands out, and we can see how this society is very divided, even regarding the issues that were prevalent very much in the past. Let's get into it. This part of the text demonstrates a conversation that Lockie is having with his father, Mr. Mortlock, and they're talking about the club, the football club, having difficulty and possibly going to suffer a merger with another club because it can't sustain itself anymore. And this line's particularly interesting. "Damn shame to see the club disappear after 120 odd years." So the Mortlocks have traditional ties with this club, and they see value in it continuing. But ironically, they don't see the importance in the Aboriginal traditions in the lands around them. So I suppose what the author is trying to do here is highlight the connections that we have with certain institutions, in this case with a football club, and draw parallels between those and the connections that some of the Aboriginal people have with their sacred sites. Anyway, let's continue. Throughout the conversation, we see some differences of opinion develop quite quickly. And while David has coached some Aboriginal children before, Craig comments that their brains aren't wired up that way. Brilliant, quick, amazing skills, but unreliable. Can't turn up to training week in, week out. No commitment, no discipline. He probably doesn't realise, while he's saying this, that the words the words that he is using and the ideas that he is representing are actually quite racist. And we can see how this incidental or accidental racism is quite prevalent in this town of Bort, simply because of the attitudes that these characters display. The conversation gets even more heated from this point, and it's not until we get further on here where we see how how much tension there is between some of these characters. In this purple section here, and this is where Ellie gets involved, and she's been relatively quiet in this conversation until now. And her line, "Isn't it interesting how black boys make trouble, but white boys just have accidents?" And she's really trying to highlight here how there are very different views. There are extreme double standards, if you like, when it comes to how we judge one culture in comparison to how we judge another. And that's another good example of this institutionalized or this accidental racism that we see represented clearly in this chapter. And that is frustrating for her and for us as an audience too, that we want to see some sort of equality between the races, but that doesn't appear that it will be achieved. As we continue, Craig's response to that notion is, well, maybe someone else should have thought twice before she ran off with a new boyfriend. Now, there are clearly some old wounds. There's a lot of history between these people that has been unresolved, and this is a motif that pops up now and again throughout this text, that we cannot let the troubles of the past go unresolved. We must deal with those issues before we can move on and have a smooth future. After the initial argument, as Ellie, Sadie, and David are about to walk on home, Ellie and David continue the conversation, and it highlights some further complications where David comments, "I'd rather spend my energy on kids who really need it." Ellie thrusts her hands into her gloves. "You mean not white kids?" Here David is being challenged in terms of his racist views as well. He's not willing to see people as equals, according to what Ellie is saying to him here. And it really does highlight how it's easy to fall into this trap of judging people differently simply according to their skin colour. Even if we don't mean to, it can be quite accidental. At the end of this chapter here, we can see, even though it's quite tense between Lockie and Sadie, because Sadie's lost interest in Lockie at this point. She doesn't really respect him, or she's not as infatuated by him at this point. But we can see a different side to Lockie and his character, and the unease that he demonstrates here shows that he's perhaps not really had to ask for help from an Aboriginal person on many occasions. And so when he asks David if he would like to become the coach, or at least help out with being the coach, I think this shows an important part of Lockie's development as a character, because he's quite uncomfortable, yet still pushes through and asks David. Well, that's a very quick rundown of some of the important quotations and sections in this chapter. There are lots of other quotes that you could look at and analyse, and you should certainly do that in your own time. This has been an ETV production brought to you by Prendeville Catholic College.